A beloved healthcare worker is viciously attacked in her home.
We got a female down.
I've never seen anything this brutal before. Severe head trauma, multiple stab wounds.
Her daughter is the only witness.
She mentioned something about an intruder, somebody broke in.
She's completely catatonic. She has no touch with reality at all.
Is she gonna be okay?
An investigation reveals the cracks in a loving relationship.
It was almost like sisters, that they just really got along.
Did you notice any, change in her mood?
I could tell she was getting more upset.
The evidence points to a suspect who is desperate to hide the truth.
She was really trying to keep up this facade that everything in her world was okay.
It was a problem that had built up, and finally came to a head when the truth came out.
On March 3rd, 2020, police in Akron, Ohio receive an alarming call from a nearby university.
The callers were from the University of Mount Union in Alliance, Ohio. It's about 40 minutes from here. And they were calling because they were in the middle of a conversation with somebody named Brenda Powell in reference to Brenda's daughter, Sydney Powell, who was a student at Mount Union, and the conversation got interrupted in a strange way. They reported that they heard a bunch of strange noises they described as a couple loud thuds, screams, and then some other, just unusual sounds, and then the phone went dead. They tried to call back, and they didn't get an answer. They were concerned that something had happened to Brenda. They wanted us we the police, to go out and just to check, making sure everything's okay. When the officers arrived, they went to the front door.
I can hear her screaming in there. Front door is locked.
Officer Legacy went around towards the rear of the house, and he had noticed that one of the rear windows had been broken, and there appeared to be some blood around it. There was a sliding glass patio door, and he had observed that had also been broken in.
Akron Police!
And then there was some blood, looked like some blood smears there.
Akron Police!
And that's where he made entry.
Inside, the officer finds a young woman covered in blood.
Where's your mom at?
No, there's so much blood. No, please! Mom! She's going now!
She says she's Brenda's daughter, Sydney Powell.
Sydney is just hysterical. She's preventing the officers from going down the hallway. She mentioned something about an intruder, somebody broke in. So they really don't know what they're dealing with. She did say that her mom was bleeding, so they went to check it out. Officer Legacy made the discovery that Brenda was on the floor in the bedroom, surrounded by a massive amount of blood.
Brenda is bleeding from multiple wounds to her head and neck. So the officer immediately calls for emergency services.
Sergeant Smart, you just got a crime scene. A little over.
As officers rush to provide Brenda with life-saving care, Sydney is inconsolable.
She was very emotional.
Come on.
Screaming. So their first action was to remove Sydney from the interior of the scene.
Come on.
Is she gonna be okay?
Come on. Come on. You just need to cooperate with me, all right?
I love my dad.
Huh?
I love my dad.
What happened? What's going on? What's going on?
We heard a bang. We heard a bang. And she told me to get out. And then I heard screaming. So I came back and she was on the ground.
Okay, you heard a
I ran
bang.
out back. There was a bang, someone broken.
The police are trying to determine what's going on. They see Sydney covered in blood. They don't know if there is an intruder that's gone, an intruder still on scene. In the house, police are pretty shocked to find that Brenda is still alive, considering the amount of blood on scene. So they try and do anything at all to stop the bleeding, to keep her alive as long as possible.
Brenda Doyle was born on March 19, 1969 in Salem, Ohio. She was a high achiever from an early age, excelling in Catholic school and going on to graduate from the University of Akron with honors.
She had her degree in early childhood education. She then proceeded to work at Akron Children's Hospital as a child life specialist. When she started there, she was dealing basically with adolescents and children that dealt with a cancer or blood disorders. I met Brenda in 1995 through some mutual friends. This was a setup. We went on our first date as a group of us. Her smile is what really attracted me to her the first time. She just had that little snarky, sarcastic-looking little smile on her face that she just always seemed happy.
27-year-old Brenda was equally sure-footed in her relationship. She and 30-year-old Steve Powell married in 1996, just a year after their first date together.
We couldn't really make a decision on who wasn't going to be in the wedding, so I think we put all of our friends in. I had 7 groomsmen, and she had 7 bridesmaids, so it was a large, fun wedding.
Brenda and Steve went on to have 2 children together. Their daughter Sydney was born in 2000, and 3 years later, they had a son. For the next 2 decades, Brenda split her time between work and family.
Brenda had one of the most difficult jobs I could ever imagine. She had to sit with families and talk to them about a cancer diagnosis, about chemotherapy, with kids who were going through the worst time in their life. Brenda was amazing. She was loved universally by everyone that she worked with.
Brenda's personality as a mother was very nurturing. I think from all those years of being at the hospital and dealing with the children that were there, I think she just did all she could to protect her child and did everything to make sure that, they grew up healthy.
Brenda and Sydney were especially close.
It was almost like sisters that they just really got along. Sydney was the mini-me of Brenda. I mean, they had the same personalities.
I remember her and her mom were always texting. I think Sydney really did look up to her mom, wanted to be how Brenda was. Be there to help people, to always put others first.
Sydney appeared to share her mother's drive and ambition as well.
Sydney's grades always were good, and all throughout elementary school and high school, she did a little bit of everything sports-wise and ended up really settling in on soccer, which she excelled at.
We were teammates. Sydney was a ball of fire. She was very small, but on the field, she was, one of our best players. So we always looked up to her, as a role model or as someone who would set an example on the field.
Sydney's high school academic career was impressive enough to earn her a presidential scholarship to the University of Mount Union. She moved into campus housing in the fall of 2018, but maintained frequent contact with her family.
Sydney was very excited to go to college. I think she was ready to spread her wings a little bit and go out there. She was going to get into something sports, physical fitness, training related. Then she eventually switched out of that to psychiatry.
By her sophomore year, Sydney seemed to be flourishing, and her relationship with her mother was closer than ever.
Mount Union is approximately 40 minutes from where we live. She would come home sporadically on the weekends since it was so close. If Sydney had a concern, Brenda would be the first one she would talk to. They really talked, and they got along.
But now, the mother and daughter have been involved in a vicious attack, leaving Brenda clinging to life and Sydney traumatized.
Are you cut?
I don't think so.
Yeah, you're cut somewhere.
I don't think so.
Yeah, your hand.
No, I was helping her. I grabbed her.
All right, stop. I tell you what, can you sit on the ground here real quick?
While first responders tend to Sydney and Brenda, her father, Steve Powell, races home.
I got a call from my friend, who happens to be a police officer, heard a call go out with my address. Sydney was down by the mailbox when I got it home, and she was almost shaking. I had no idea what was going on.
Coming up, a witness's erratic behavior perplexes officers.
No, she's not acting right.
And when tragedy strikes, detectives must grapple with a harsh reality.
I'm sure at that point I ended up going into shock. And then after that, it's pretty much a blur.
50-year-old Brenda Powell is in critical condition after she was attacked during an apparent break-in. Her husband, Steve Powell, has just arrived home to find his daughter Sydney in a state of shock.
What's going on? This guy, Dad.
I'm the dad.
Okay,
Sydney. I don't know.
Okay.
I don't know.
Daddy!
Where's my wife?
The window's broken, Dad!
Where?
The back window's broken in!
So you guys don't...
Daddy!
inside there, so...
I don't know! There was so much blood!
I tried to go up into the house, and I made it basically as far into the front room as I could, and then they proceeded to escort me out of the house.
You need to go outside, sir.
No, I don't.
Yes, you do. Outside. Back to the
Somebody
right.
pull
All the
you.
way back to the right.
Somebody pull you.
You need to stay outside. Go ahead. Please have a seat.
I don't want to.
Okay.
As paramedics continue treating both women, officers cordon off the crime scene.
My friend got there, and they took me back to his car. Very frustrating to not have any information what was going on, where your daughter's laying down by the mailbox and you don't know where your wife is.
Now, Brenda didn't look good. However, one of the paramedics was able to find a faint pulse. So based on that, they rushed her to the hospital.
Sydney is completely experiencing a psychotic break. She's completely catatonic. She continues to mumble kind of nonsensically.
She's likely going in and out of things, and she sees this evidence of a terrible crime around her.
Sydney. Sydney. Sydney.
Oh, what's going on with
Sydney. What's going on? Huh? I need to know what's going on.
She was just laying there shaking and clawing the street, wasn't mumbling, wasn't saying anything.
Something definitely was not right. It was not normal behavior.
She's just not acting right?
No, she's not acting right.
All right. What was she involved with? What is this?
Well, we don't know.
We couldn't really determine at the scene what exactly her injuries were, but one of the paramedics crews looked at her and they ended up taking her to a hospital to get examined.
An officer escorts Sydney, hoping to gain more information. With Brenda and Sydney both on the way to the emergency room, investigators begin searching the house for evidence.
When I arrived, I met with Officer Legacy, and he kind of took me through the path that he took through the house. We were just trying to figure out, okay, what are we dealing with? We know Sydney was screaming about somebody breaking in, but besides the bedroom and the broken windows, there was nothing out of place. I didn't see any signs of any struggle or anything like that inside the kitchen. And then he took me down the hallway that separates the kitchen and the bedroom. He was pointing out different blood smears, appear to be blood smears on both sides of the wall. I just remember turning the corner and looking into the bedroom and just seeing all that blood. It's one of the worst scenes I've been to. There was an iron skillet that was on the floor near to where Brenda was, and also a knife. It looked like to us that these might have been the possible weapons that were used.
In addition to the weapons, detectives also find the cell phone Brenda was using when she was attacked.
We're thinking, what happened? Are we dealing with somebody that broke in and attacked them for a burglary type situation? What about Sydney? Was Sydney involved in this? Does she have any information?
It's about an 8 or 9 minute drive to the hospital. The police officers trying to figure out what's going on, asking Sydney some basic questions.
What are you saying, Sydney? Huh? What are you saying?
She's not making any sense. She has no touch with reality at all. From the ambulance, Sydney's then taken to the psychiatric ward.
As Sydney is interacting with officers and her dad, something that we hear her say over and over again is, "Get out of the house, get out of the house." The police obviously don't know if she's a victim too. She is clearly in a state of shock.
And she really wasn't focusing on the detectives. She really wasn't acknowledging that they were even present, so we decided not to ask her any more questions at that point. We needed more information. Sydney wasn't going to be able to tell us anything. We're going to have to figure out other ways about what happened.
In the emergency room, doctors are doing everything they can to save Brenda Powell's life. Her 19-year-old daughter, Sydney, is being treated for wounds of her own. But she's still unable to tell anyone what happened. Investigators hope Brenda's husband, Steve, can provide some insight.
When they finally took me to the police station, they basically took a statement on what transpired up until the time that I got there. Any communication I had with Brenda or Sydney up until that moment.
Where'd you get a call from? What happened?
Got a call from him.
A call from me.
He said there was a call, went out, a distress call from the University of Mount Union where my daughter was going, and said, female in distress. I said, well, that's funny because Brenda's there, my wife.
Steve says the day began like any other. He and Brenda had breakfast, then both headed into work. Sydney was scheduled to visit that weekend for spring break, which reminded Steve to pay her tuition for the following semester.
I sign on, it says your login or password ID doesn't work. I'm like, well, that's weird, so I recover my password and I put in the right answer and it didn't work. So I sent Mount Union Billing an email and says, basically, what's wrong? So she called me back today and says, well, the reason you can't get on, long story short, is your daughter is unenrolled.
The university informed Steve that due to poor grades, his daughter had been academically suspended 2 months earlier.
So I text Sydney, I'm like, oh, give me a call. I have a question to ask you. I call her, no answer.
Steve and Brenda had installed Life 360 on their phone, so they could see where Sydney was at all times. So Steve sees on his phone that his daughter's home. He thinks to himself, why is she home?
I go home and there she is, she's at home. Perfectly normal. She's crying because I said, what's going on? Are you not going to school? She goes, I'm overwhelmed in school. And I don't really like what I'm doing, and it seems like it's a waste of my time and your money.
And me shocked. Since the winter quarter ended, she wasn't even enrolled, and they never knew about it. Steve called Brenda and made Brenda aware of what's going on, and he decides to go back to work. Now, the mom, Brenda Powell's coming home because she obviously wants to know what's going on as well.
According to Steve, he received a call from Brenda at 11:49 a.m. to let him know she was pulling into the driveway. An hour later, he received the call from a friend in law enforcement that officers had been sent to his address.
So I called Brenda, and it rings on her cell phone, no answer. I call Brenda back, ring, no answer. I'm pacing around. My doctor calls me back. Said, oh, Mom's on the phone with Mount Union. I said, well, cops are on the way. She went, there was a break-in, and she just started going off.
When Mr. Powell told her that the police were on their way, she immediately said there was an intruder. She started screaming. But up until that point, there was no other 911 call from that address. So that was a huge piece of information that kind of directed us a little bit about what might have happened. The focus became Sydney. Why didn't she reach out for help? Examining the scene itself, with the broken glass, there was blood inside, outside. It's kind of odd to have blood on both sides of the window. It was the opinion of all of us that the intruder scenario was highly unlikely.
As the interview progresses, victim assistance workers come to offer Steve their support just before detectives receive word from the hospital.
Well, that's really bad news. Your wife passed away. What happened?
We're not sure. It looks like, I don't think someone broke into the house. I don't know if your wife and daughter got into an argument, got physical. I mean, the window was broken, but there's no forced entry into the house. The window's broken, but nobody actually came through that window. And the sliding door was unlocked. So, did your wife and daughter ever have like really heated arguments?
No.
I'm just trying to figure out in my head, you know, what actually could have happened, because nothing was adding up to me. I had nothing to go on. I'm sure at that point I ended up going into shock of some sort, because I don't remember talking to them after that. I had to inform my son of what had happened, and after that it's pretty much a blur.
While Steve copes with the heartbreaking news, investigators must reassess the situation. The lack of forced entry into the home, combined with signs of an altercation, suggest a painful possibility.
I think he had some kind of idea that Sydney was responsible for this. I don't think he thought that there was an intruder, even though he might not wanted to believe it. At that point, we know we were dealing with a homicide investigation. It was just very unusual that we're trying to piece together, okay, was there an intruder or did Sydney do this?
Despite her claims of a break-in, Sydney Powell has become an unexpected person of interest in her mother's murder. Since Brenda was on the phone with university administrators when she was attacked, detectives review her cell phone records for more information.
What we know from looking at the cell phone records is there was about 3 minutes and 30 seconds between that first call and the second call. And what we know is all of the injuries to Brenda happened within that 3 minutes and 30 seconds.
Investigators speak with the Deans to corroborate.
They were in the middle of a conversation with Brenda Powell, but then they heard thumping and screaming, and then the phone went dead. They were very emotional about it, and they just didn't know what to make of it.
The Deans say after the line went dead, they immediately tried to call back. And after a few attempts, someone answered.
And what they described as a calm voice, "This is Brenda." And Dean Gaffney and Dean Frazier, having known Sydney as a student, they knew right away that that was Sydney. They asked her, "Sydney, is that you?" And then the phone went dead again.
Sydney's behavior on the phone, where she says, "This is Brenda," where she's pretending to be her, saying everything's fine, it's a falsehood.
She never said anything about an intruder. So we began more and more as we looked into this that was unlikely and that Sydney was actually responsible for this.
Forensic analysis seems to support police suspicions.
When the crime scene unit came, we started taking our time looking at the scene. It appeared with the knife and the skillet that those most likely came from inside of the house.
The most damning evidence is a set of bloody footprints in the house.
We were able to eliminate any foreign shoe being involved. It was Sydney's. We knew that the main incident happened in the bedroom, and by observing all that blood all over the place in different locations throughout, it was clear to us that, Sydney had been moving throughout the house at different times, before and after the police arrived.
Although Sydney appeared traumatized at the time, the evidence indicates she attempted to cover up what she'd done.
The window's broken, Dad! Where? The back window's broken in!
The broken window was at the very rear of the house. We didn't see any rock or any object that would have done it. So we think that she most likely did it with her own hands because she did have blood on her hands. After she knew the police were coming, she most likely broke out the windows to portray an intruder instead of what really happened. We're 4 or 5 hours into the investigation. We got authorization to sign charges on her for murder, for murdering her mother. We took her into custody. She didn't make any further statements.
It's no longer a whodunit. We know who did it. But anytime you handle a homicide that involves family members, why is always going to be the first question.
When I first heard Sydney was arrested, I had the same response everybody heard. There was no way that anybody that knew Sydney and Brenda would have guessed that this would have been the scenario that played out.
I've never seen anything this brutal before. Brenda had severe head trauma, and she had multiple stab wounds right below the base of her neck, between her shoulders. It's going through our minds that, you know, what could happen to cause that much rage?
Following Sydney's arrest, detectives visit her university to better understand her psychological state.
After talking with the officials at Mount Union, we learned quite a bit about the situation that was going on with Sydney.
Sydney starts Mount Union fall of 2018. She goes there with one of her best friends. She joins a sorority, and by all appearances, starts to just live a normal college life. She completes her first year, and everything seems to be going fine. But it's fall 2019 when we notice that her grades start slipping.
Sydney went from a 3.8 grade point average down to academic probation within 2 semesters. So something was clearly wrong with Sydney.
There's conversations with deans, and eventually she winds up being disenrolled as a student in that spring 2020 semester.
Sydney went home for Christmas break, and she just couldn't tell her parents that she had been expelled or suspended from school.
Sydney's college friends tell investigators she came back from the break acting like nothing was wrong.
She even went back for the spring semester in January of 2020 and continued to even try to convince her friends and her roommates that she was still a student when in fact she wasn't.
She was still going to classes, even though she wasn't in them. She was trying to figure out ways of getting in the dorm building.
We talked to Sydney's roommate and best friend. She would see her leave with a book bag. They went to social events together like there were everybody else in Sydney's life. She had no idea that Sydney was no longer a student.
Did you notice any, change in her mood? Was she talking about anything, or?
When we were just talking or with our friends, she always seemed happy. I couldn't tell until the end where she was kind of just like struggling and she kind of was sad. I could tell she was getting more upset and more sad. And I told her, if you need anything, I'm here. But she never really opened up.
Sydney was really trying to keep up this facade that everything in her world was okay when it was all completely crumbling.
Mount Union's a small campus. The deans are obviously aware of what's going on with Sydney and find out she's still trying to stay on campus and pretend to be a student. And they pretty much make it clear to her she can't keep doing that.
Sydney's friends say she moved out of her dorm a week before the murder.
Through examination of her phone, computer, we knew that she was doing Google searches from various hotels and that she had not been home.
The school has made it pretty clear she's not allowed to stay on campus anymore. But she also knows she can't go home without letting her parents know what's been going on. So she doesn't want to choose that either. She's running out of money. She's running out of options.
Coming up, was this a crime of passion or a mental health crisis?
There was no leading indicators that it would be that type of diagnoses.
And a divisive trial ensues.
I did not meet a family member that wanted a murder conviction, that wanted a life sentence for Sydney. Not one.
Sidney Powell's murder trial is set to begin in February 2022. 2 years after the brutal attack on her mother, Brenda Powell. Just before the court date arrives, prosecutors discover how she intends to plead.
Our defense was she was insane at the time, and that prevented her from knowing the wrongfulness of her conduct. One of the different things about not guilty by reason of insanity is that the defense has the burden to prove by a preponderance of the evidence that the person is suffering from a severe mental disease or defect. She was being held involuntarily at the psychiatric unit. During that stay, they finally diagnosed her with schizophrenia. This is the age when these serious mental diseases start to manifest. Late teens, early 20s for females.
It was very surprising to hear that that is what the diagnosis was, because there was no leading indicators that would be that type of diagnosis.
The doctors started treating her immediately with antipsychotropic drugs, and she stabilized to the point where she could be released from a psychiatric hospital.
Sidney is released on bond to her family while she awaits trial.
My job was now to make sure she is now going to be taken care of. I took her down to Brenda's mom's. They have a farm down in eastern Ohio. She would always be really good with the horses and the dogs out there. You know, outwardly she was, getting better.
Sidney's lawyers had 3 doctors evaluate her, and they all had the same conclusion.
What all 3 of these doctors said is she was experiencing long periods of lucid thoughts, but they were interrupted by serious and significant psychotic episodes. That first serious psychotic break occurred with her and Brenda, unfortunately, the day that Brenda was killed. I mean, it just doesn't make sense that the reason she killed her mom was because she got kicked out of school. Killing Brenda doesn't solve that problem. That kind of attack, that kind of brutality is completely out of character for Sidney, and it screams insanity. When we watch Sidney on the body cam, when police first arrive, she's completely disassociated.
Where's your mom at?
No, there's so much blood. No, please.
She had no recollection of any violence with her and her mother, but she's coming to and she's seeing this horrific crime scene, and she's trying to make sense of what's going on. Each and every doctor that saw that video, saw that footage, said that's a catatonic state.
Sidney! What's going on?
Brenda's family tells prosecutors they also don't think Sidney should be held responsible for her actions, and they ask that she be declared unfit for trial.
I'm very supportive. Her grandparents are very supportive. Her brother's supportive. The goal for the whole family and for Sidney is just to get her better, and we want her back.
Nobody close to Brenda or Steve or Sidney was wishing to pursue this criminally.
We weren't asking them to let her go scot-free or without any of the analysis by the doctors. We wanted them to look at seriously and consider those 3 separate medical opinions showing that she was not guilty by reason of insanity. That's all we wanted.
The state ultimately decides to continue in pursuit of a trial.
The standard in Ohio is that not only does a person have some kind of mental disease going on at the time, but it's because of that mental disease that they couldn't appreciate the wrongfulness of their actions. While she may have had some mental health issues at the time, her actions around the crime are clearly consistent with someone who knew exactly what they were doing and then tried to cover it up. Sidney never stops the cover-up. Even in the seconds afterwards when the dean calls back and she's able to talk to him, she is still saying, no, I'm Brenda. She pretends to be her mom.
So I'm not a psychiatrist. I don't have a medical degree. I can only look at the evidence that we have. When she called her dad, she had just brutally killed her mother, but she was still, to me, thinking, okay, I need to do something to make the police think that I didn't do this, to make them think that there's an intruder.
In preparation for the trial, prosecutors hire their own expert to evaluate Sydney.
Dr. Obradovich takes a look at the case file, interviews the defendant, gets her hands on as much information as possible, and ultimately comes to the conclusion that Sydney is competent to stand trial and that she was sane at the time of the crime.
The psychologist interprets Sydney's behavior not as evidence of insanity, but as a trauma response caused by witnessing her own brutal actions.
Sydney was also diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder as a result of what she had done to her mom and all the after effects.
Prosecutors seek a trial date, but it's delayed by the COVID pandemic.
Sydney was out on bond for about 3.5 years before the case went to trial.
She actually thrived while out on bond. She helped out with the horses on the farm, and it was helpful to her. Pursuant to the doctors, she improved.
I understood what they were charging her with. I understood what happened. I understood everything, but still, in my heart of hearts, I'm still thinking this is not happening. This is not what nobody wanted it.
There were multiple attempts to come to a resolution to the trial prior to, so the family wouldn't have to go back through this. I was disappointed that this didn't happen in this case. It seemed to me prosecutors were interested in one thing only, which was a guilty verdict.
After multiple postponements, Sydney Powell's murder trial begins on September 7th, 2023, nearly 4 years after the death of her mother.
Our heart goes out to the family in this case. I know that they had different wishes, and I do respect that. But ultimately, we have to do our job and prosecute a crime.
What the whole trial centered upon was, did she know what she was doing, or was it under the influence of some type of mental disability?
What you have is a battle of the experts.
It was really all or nothing. And what I mean by that is it was either guilty of murder or not guilty by reason of insanity.
The trial is broadcast on television and streamed online.
Watching the trial was hard. I think myself, along with everyone else who tuned in, just wanted to know why. Why did she do the gruesome things that she did to her mom? Who was her best friend, confidant, or someone that, really loved and supported her?
You just look into her eyes like that's not her. She's not there. Seeing the body cam footage was, I think, harder than I thought it was going to be. Hearing her yell.
Is she gonna be okay?
The Sydney Powell I knew wouldn't ever do something like that.
Sydney!
We think the evidence showed clearly and conclusively that
What's going on?
Sydney was in the midst of a horrific, psychotic, violent break and did not know the wrongfulness of her conduct.
After 2 weeks of hearing the evidence, the case rests in the hands of the jury.
Unfortunately, they came back and said murder.
They do not buy that she was insane at the time.
In the state of Ohio, there's only one sentence for murder, and that is life in prison with the possibility of parole after 15 years. So the judge imposed that sentence. Although we were prepared for, as best you can, a guilty verdict, it was still soul-crushing.
We understand that this was not Sydney. This was a very small little snippet in time that something went horribly wrong.
To the investigators and the prosecutors, it wasn't from mental illness, it was just from a problem that had built up and finally came to a head when the truth came out.
It's in that moment when she makes that decision that she's going to stop her mom from having a conversation from the dean. In that split second when she realized that her lie was going to be uncovered, she snapped.
Within that state that she was in, she had more power than she realized. Deep down, I feel like she wasn't intentionally trying to kill her mom.
Even after her conviction, Sydney's loved ones are pursuing an appeal.
I think she knows, and if she doesn't, we tell her that, we still love her. Brenda would want us to continue to fight. I have that sense of feeling that she is right there with us, leading this charge to help Sydney. A lot of people told me how much Brenda touched, maybe not even their lives, but their cousin or anybody. She just could do that.
I've spent a lot of time with Sydney, and Sydney, more than anyone on the planet, is trying to search for some answer. And, she is also incredibly remorseful and grieving the loss of her mom, the loss of her best friend.
I really feel for the Powell family. It's tragic. I feel for Steve having to lose his wife in this manner and then essentially lose his daughter. I can't imagine what they're going through. It's just tragic.
After Brenda's passing, we tried to figure out a way to keep her memory alive. And they actually came up with a Brenda K. Powell scholarship that's at Akron Children's Hospital that gives financial reward for kids that have gone through cancer and are going on to higher education. Brenda, loved working with the kids at the hospital. That's just the way Brenda was. She was like the mother to them all. She was just a sweet soul.
The chilling truth often lies concealed beneath layers of deception and the fractured landscapes of the human mind. Our journey today takes us into the heart of a tragedy that defied easy explanation, a case that illuminated the profound complexities of human behavior, the relentless pursuit of justice, and a heartbreaking toll of unforeseen mental affliction. It begins with the raw, visceral shock of a violent act that tore apart a loving family, leaving behind a bewildered community grappling for understanding. A beloved healthcare worker is viciously attacked in her home. I've never seen anything that's brutal before. Severe head trauma, multiple stab wounds. These words, stripped of any embellishment, convey the initial, raw horror that confronted seasoned law enforcement officers. The scene itself, later revealed in meticulous detail, was one that etched itself permanently into the memories of those who witnessed it. A tableau of unimaginable violence within the sanctity of a family home. The phrase, "I've never seen anything that's brutal before," coming from a professional speaks volumes, hinting at the sheer, overwhelming ferocity of the assault suffered by Brenda Powell, a woman cherished by all who knew her. It signifies an intensity of violence that transcends mere aggression, suggesting an act driven by extreme emotion or a deeply disturbed state of mind. The stark medical terminology, severe head trauma and multiple stab wounds, paints a grim picture, leaving little to the imagination about the victims, suffering, and the grave danger to her life. At the epicenter of this unfolding nightmare was a solitary, profoundly traumatized figure. Her daughter is the only witness. She mentioned something about an intruder, somebody broke in. She's completely catatonic. She has no touch with reality at all. This immediately introduced an element of profound psychological mystery into the initial moments of the investigation. A witness, particularly a child or young adult who has endured such a terrifying event, is often a crucial source of information. Yet, in this instance, the witness presented as an enigma. Sydney, the daughter, was not merely distraught. Her condition was described with stark clinical precision as completely catatonic, signifying a state of profound unresponsiveness. a disassociation so severe that it rendered her incapable of providing any coherent narrative. To be catatonic implies an almost frozen detachment from the surrounding world, a mental shutdown in the face of overwhelming horror. And her declaration that she had no touch with reality at all highlighted the immense challenge. Facing law enforcement, extracting truth from a mind in such profound distress seemed an impossible task. The initial report of an intruder, somebody broke in, though chilling, was delivered in a manner that immediately raised questions, becoming a statement shrouded in a fog of extreme psychological shock rather than a clear recollection of facts. As the raw emotions of the immediate aftermath began to subside, giving way to the methodical machinery of justice, an investigation reveals the cracks in a loving relationship. This sentence, carefully chosen, suggested a hidden truth, a subcurrent of tension or unacknowledged difficulties that had simmered beneath the surface of what appeared to be an idyllic family dynamic. It subtly indicated that the crime might not have been a random act of external malevolence, but rather a culmination of internal pressures, something deeply personal and tragically confined within the family unit. The phrase cracks in a loving relationship did not imply a lack of love, but rather imperfections, vulnerabilities, or strains that, while perhaps minor in their everyday manifestation, had proven to be critical under extraordinary pressure. The profound bond between Brenda and Sydney was universally recognized and admired. It was almost like sisters that they just really got along, a testament to a connection that transcended the typical mother-daughter relationship. It painted a picture of mutual affection, shared interests, and deep companionship, reinforcing the seeming unlikelihood of the horrors that had just transpired. Such a close bond made the violence even more incomprehensible, a violation of the most fundamental trusts and affections. Yet, even within this closeness, subtle observations about Sydney's evolving emotional state were recalled. Did you notice any change in her mood? I can tell she's being more excited. This seemingly innocuous comment, recollected later, might have held an entirely different meaning in retrospect. More excited could, in some contexts, hint at an elevated state, perhaps even an agitation that was misinterpreted as positive enthusiasm at the time. The very act of asking this question demonstrated the investigators' nuanced approach, searching for any subtle precursor or shift in behavior that might shed light on the unspeakable. Events. Inevitably, as the layers of the immediate crime began to peel away under the scrutinizing gaze of forensic science and careful interrogation, the evidence points to a suspect who is desperate to hide the truth. This marked a pivotal shift in the investigative narrative, moving from the initial confusion of an unknown assailant to a directed focus. It suggested not only culpability, but also a deliberate attempt at concealment, an act of premeditation or post-incident rationalization that contradicted the initial impression of apure victim. The word desperate was key, conveying a sense of urgent, perhaps poorly executed, attempts to obfuscate reality, hinting at a mindset driven by fear, panic, or a profound inability to confront consequences, further painting a portrait of the alleged suspect's internal world. She was really trying to keep up this facade that everything in her world was okay. This statement unveiled a fundamental psychological defense mechanism, the creation of an artificial front to present to the world while inner turmoil raged. A facade is a common coping strategy, but when it is applied to truly catastrophic personal failures, its maintenance can consume immense emotional energy, leading to an inevitable and often dramatic collapse. The phrase, "everything in her world was okay," starkly contrasted with the grim reality that was, simultaneously crumbling, illustrating the vast chasm between external appearance and internal truth. Ultimately, as often happens when deep-seated issues are allowed to fester, it was the problem that had built up and finally came to a head when the truth came out. This pointed to a cumulative effect, a series of unaddressed challenges, concealed anxieties, and escalating pressures that reached a breaking point. A dramatic eruption triggered by the imminent disclosure of a long-held secret. The truth emerging was not merely information. It was a cataclysm. The day etched into the calendar as the inception of the profound tragedy was on March 3rd, 2020. Police in Akron, Ohio received an alarming call from a nearby university. This precise detail provided the temporal and geographical anchor for our narrative, pinpointing the moment when the calm routine of a Tuesday was shattered by an urgent summons for aid. The word alarming immediately set a tone of gravity, suggesting that the content of the call transcended routine concern, indicating a palpable sense of unease or outright terror. Akron, a city in northeastern Ohio, became the initial focal point of the emerging crisis, its local law enforcement agencies being the first to grapple with the disturbing report. The specificity of the date, March 3rd, 2020, would forever mark this day as the demarcation line between the peaceful normalcy of the Powell family's life and the dark chaos that would irrevocably alter their future. The origin of this distress communication was unique, diverging from the typical frantic call made by a direct witness or victim. The callers were from the University of Mount Union in Alliance, Ohio. It's about 40 minutes from here. The fact that the call originated not from the crime scene itself, but from a university campus some considerable distance away, added an immediate layer of intrigue and complexity to the burgeoning investigation. Alliance, Ohio, approximately 40 minutes separate from Akron, housed Mount Union, an institution that would play an increasingly significant role in understanding the backdrop to the tragedy. The distance, while not immense, underscored that the university officials were not eyewitnesses to the physical event, but rather witnesses to the auditory echoes of the violence reverberating across telephone lines, amplifying the initial unsettling nature of the report. This unique chain of events immediately highlighted the unusual circumstances that the first responders were about to encounter. Their reasons for contacting law enforcement were deeply concerning. They were calling because they were in the middle of a conversation with somebody named Brenda Powell, in reference to Brenda's daughter, Sydney Powell, who was a student at Mount Union, and the conversation got interrupted in a strange way. This provided a crucial linkage: the university's concern for one of its students, Sydney, and the alarming interruption of a call with her mother, Brenda. It painted a picture of a routine, perhaps even collegial, discussion between university administrators and a concerned parent that suddenly, violently veered into unimaginable terror. Brenda Powell, the mother, was engaged in a dialogue about her daughter, Sydney Powell, who was currently enrolled as a student. The phrase "interrupted in a strange way" was an understatement, hinting at an immediate and drastic shift in the auditory landscape of the phone call, an interruption that was far from benign. This detail was invaluable for the burgeoning investigation, providing both a specific timeline for the incident and an initial point of contact for understanding Brenda's final moments of perceived safety. The specifics of this unsettling interruption were vivid and deeply disturbing. They reported that they heard some bunch of strange noises they described as a couple loud thuds, screams, and then some other, just unusual sounds, and then the phone went dead. These auditory cues, perceived across telephone wires, provided the chilling first glimpse into the escalating violence. Loud thuds suggested impacts, heavy blows, a shocking sound indicating physical confrontation or assault. The primal terror of screams immediately signaled a person in profound distress, in pain, or in fear for their life. The catch-all phrase, some other, just unusual sounds, implied a cacophony of disorganized, unsettling noises, an auditory chaos that shattered the calm of the prior conversation. And then the abrupt, deafening silence. The phone went dead. The sudden cessation of sound, far from being relief, was in itself a profound warning, suggesting not merely a dropped call, but a dramatic, violent conclusion to the interaction. It painted a terrifying mental image for the university officials, instilling in them a deep-seated fear for Brenda's immediate safety. Their immediate reaction, driven by concern, further underscored the gravity of the situation. They tried to call back, and they didn't get an answer. They were concerned that something had happened to Brenda. This simple act of attempting to reestablish contact, and the subsequent failure to do so, intensified the officials' alarm. It confirmed their worst suspicions that the line hadn't merely been disconnected by accident. The inability to get an answer, the ominous silence on the other end, solidified their conviction that an emergency was unfolding. Their profound concern for Brenda was legitimate and immediate, escalating what might have been dismissed as a technical glitch into an urgent and potentially life-threatening situation, compelling them to act decisively. Recognizing the dire potential of the circumstances, they made the critical decision to involve local law enforcement. They wanted us we the police, to go out and just check making sure everything's okay. This was a welfare check request, a common police duty, but one now infused with a sense of extreme urgency and foreboding. The simple phrase, making sure everything's okay, belied the very real fear that something was tragically wrong, a fear borne out by the sound they had overheard. It shifted the responsibility for determining Brenda's well-being from the distant university. Officials to the uniformed officers of Akron, Ohio, tasking them with confronting whatever truth lay behind the closed doors of the Powell residence. This critical call set the stage for the dramatic, immediate confrontation with the unfolding tragedy. Upon receiving the alarming dispatch, uniformed officers were swiftly directed to the address. When the officers arrived, they went to the front door. This was the standard protocol for a welfare check, a systematic approach to entering what they hoped would be a calm, if puzzling, domestic scene. Their initial posture would have been one of caution, mixed with an expectation of encountering a minor issue, a medical emergency, or perhaps just a misunderstanding that could be easily resolved. However, the ordinary expectation of a quiet suburban residence was immediately shattered by auditory cues. That pierced the perceived silence, raising the alarm. I can hear screaming in there, fuck the whole plot. This dramatic, raw quote from an officer's direct account instantly communicated a seismic shift from a potential minor incident to an undeniable crisis. The screaming confirmed the worst fears ignited by the university's call, dispelling any lingering doubt that an emergency was indeed unfolding within. The expletive, though jarring, conveyed the officer's visceral reaction, a moment of profound shock and adrenaline as the full, terrifying reality of the situation abruptly crashed upon him. It was no longer a welfare check. It was a desperate race against time to intervene in an active, violent situation. Recognizing the urgency and the potential for a barricaded or unsafe front entry, Officer Legacy went around toward the rear of the house, and he had noticed that one of the rear windows had been broken, and there appeared to be some blood around it. This tactical decision to survey alternative entry points proved immediately crucial. Officer Legacy, in a display of prudent police work, discovered the first tangible evidence of a forceful, violent entry, or at least a broken barrier. A broken window instantly dispelled any notion of a peaceful domestic scene, substituting it with the stark reality of a damaged home. The unsettling presence of some blood around it was even more damning, offering a chilling visual confirmation of physical trauma and potential injury, transforming an ambiguous screaming into concrete evidence of a violent struggle. This discovery immediately escalated the perceived threat level and the severity of the incident. Further confirming a forceful breach, there was a sliding glass patio door, and he had observed that had also been broken in. This second point of damage further cemented the initial belief in a break-in scenario, presenting another visible disruption to the home's integrity. The broken-in patio door, alongside the shattered window, lent weight to the possibility of an intruder having gained entry, perhaps seeking an easier passage than the front door, and reinforcing the grim reality of the situation. Then there was some blood. Looked like some blood smears there, and that's where he made entry. The additional blood smears near the broken sliding door solidified the visual evidence of violence, indicating movement and continued trauma. This evidence of immediate danger, combined with the desperate screams echoing from within, justified Officer Legacy's immediate entry into the residence. This act, driven by the perceived necessity to save a life, bypassed the conventional protocols of securing a crime scene, prioritizing the human element of emergency intervention above all else. Inside the residence, the scene immediately presented another layer of the unfolding enigma. Inside, the officer finds a young woman covered in blood. This startling discovery brought a human element to the chaos, confirming that at least one person had been directly exposed to the violence. The sight of a young woman covered in blood would be inherently disorienting and alarming, raising immediate questions about her identity, her injuries, and her role in the events. Her identity was quickly established. She says she's Brenda's daughter, Sydney Powell. This connection to the missing Brenda, whose welfare check initiated the entire response, immediately linked Sydney to the heart of the crisis, marking her as a potential victim or a crucial witness, a living, breathing component of the unfolding nightmare. However, Sydney's state was far from a coherent, reliable source of information. Sydney is just hysterical. This description painted a picture of extreme emotional distress, an overwhelming flood of fear, confusion, and possibly anguish that render her incapable of calm communication. To be hysterical suggests a loss of emotional control, a state where rational thought is eclipsed by raw, unbridled feeling. Adding to the officer's immediate dilemma, she's preventing the officers from going down the hallway. This action, whether intentional or not, posed a significant barrier to their primary objective, locating Brenda and assessing her condition. Her resistance, born perhaps of trauma or some deeper, unknown motive, created an immediate obstacle, forcing officers to navigate not only a violent crime scene, but also an unpredictable and distraught individual. Her fragmented utterances only deepened the mystery. She mentioned something about an intruder. Somebody broke in, so they really don't know what they're dealing with. This echoed the initial university report, but was now presented directly from the person seemingly at the scene. The officers, facing a blood-covered, hysterical young woman preventing their movement, coupled with her insistent claims of a break-in, were confronted with profound uncertainty. Their operational calculus became instantly complex. Was an armed assailant still within the house? Was Sydney herself a victim held at bay? Or was her narrative a fabrication of trauma or something more sinister? The profound lack of clarity meant every subsequent action had to be weighed against an unknown threat. Amidst the chaos, one crucial piece of information finally emerged from Sydney. She did say that her mom was bleeding, so they went to check it out. This alarming statement, a fragmented cry for help concerning Brenda, immediately galvanized officers. Despite Sydney's resistance and distress, the mention of Brenda's injury provided the immediate, dire purpose for their forced entry and their need to move past Sydney. It shifted the primary focus unequivocally to locating the gravely injured mother. Acting on this desperate lead, Officer Legacy made the discovery that Brenda was on the floor in the bedroom, surrounded by a massive amount of blood. This was a horrifying culmination of the initial sounds and sights, a grim confirmation of the worst fears. The description, massive amount of blood, underscored the severity of the trauma and the immediate, critical danger to Brenda's life, painting a graphic picture of extreme violence. Brenda's condition, upon immediate inspection, was dire and required instant, life-saving intervention. Brenda is bleeding from multiple wounds to her head and neck, so the officer immediately calls for emergency services. The specific location of the injuries, multiple wounds to her head and neck, indicated a brutal, targeted assault, focusing on vulnerable and critical areas of the body. Such wounds signify profound intent to harm, even to kill, rather than a mere struggle. The officer's instantaneous decision to immediately call for emergency services demonstrated both his professional training and the overwhelming visual evidence of a critical, life-threatening situation. It was a race against time, with every second precious, as they sought to bridge the gap between initial discovery and professional medical care, attempting to mitigate the devastating effects of the assault. As officers bravely stepped into the role of emergency first responders, trying to stabilize Brenda, Sydney remained in an emotionally catastrophic state. As officers rushed to provide Brenda with life-saving care, Sydney is inconsolable. Her inconsolable grief or terror, while perhaps natural for a witness, nevertheless complicated the already chaotic scene. It highlighted the parallel tragedies unfolding, Brenda's physical fight for life, and Sydney's apparent mental and emotional disintegration. This duality presented a profound challenge to the responding officers, requiring them to manage not only the life and death struggle of the victim, but also the profound psychological distress of a key individual. She was very emotional, screaming, so their first action was to remove Sydney from the interior of the scene. The decision to physically separate Sydney from the immediate area of medical intervention was a tactical necessity driven by multiple factors. Her screaming and highly charged emotional state could potentially hinder the life-saving efforts, create further distraction, or even compromise the fragile integrity of the nascent crime scene. Removing her was a means to restore some semblance of control to a rapidly spiraling situation, prioritizing the immediate medical needs of Brenda and the securement of the chaotic environment. The officer's patient but firm approach to Sydney, recorded later through body camera footage, painted a vivid picture of the immediate aftermath. The auditory transcript offered a poignant, raw glimpse into chaos and Sydney's profound disorientation. "Come on, come on, come on. You just need to cooperate with me." "All right." The officer's repeated "come on" conveyed a mixture of urgency, exasperation, and a paternalistic plea for cooperation, recognizing that Sydney, in her current state, was likely unable to fully comprehend the gravity of the situation or the necessity of his actions. The simple request for her to cooperate was an attempt to establish a minimal level of order amidst a profound disorder. Her replies were fragmented, echoing a profound yearning for comfort and safety. "I want my dad." Her primary expressed need, "I want my dad," revealed a childlike regression in the face of overwhelming trauma, a primal instinct to seek out a parental figure for protection and solace. I want my dad." The repetition underscored the depth of this need, an anchor in a world that had suddenly become terrifyingly unmoored. The officer, seeking information to grasp the nature of the horror they had stumbled upon, pressed for details. What happened? What's going on? These fundamental questions aim to cut through the immediate emotional turmoil to glean any crucial facts. Sydney's responses were fractured, filled with sensory fragments, yet infused with the initial narrative of an external threat. "What's going on?" "We heard a bang. We heard a bang. She told a man to get out. I heard screaming. I came back, and she was on the ground. I think you heard a bang. I heard a bang. She was broken." These utterances were a stream of consciousness, a jumble of perceived sounds and actions. The repeated phrase, "We heard a bang. I heard a bang," anchored her account in a sudden, violent noise, a universally understood signal of disruption or impact. Her claim, "She told a man to get out," immediately invoked the intruder scenario, placing an unknown male perpetrator at the scene. The transition from "I heard screaming" to discovering her mother on the ground outlined a timeline of rapidly escalating horror. Her final, chilling assessment, "She was broken," while nonspecific in medical terms, conveyed profound physical damage and the irreversible nature of the trauma she perceived her mother to have suffered. These early statements, though seemingly corroborating an intruder, would later be reevaluated under a critical lens, viewed as potentially fabricated details born of confusion or calculated deceit. The police are trying to determine what's going on. This simple statement captured the immense challenge faced by law enforcement in those frantic initial moments. The scene was chaotic, riddled with conflicting signals, and devoid of a clear narrative. You know, they see Sydney covered in blood. They don't know if there is an intruder that's gone. An intruder is still unseen. This uncertainty was paramount, directly impacting their immediate tactical decisions. Sydney's blood-stained appearance, coupled with her insistence on an intruder, presented a critical ambiguity. Was the danger past, or was an armed, violent individual still a hidden threat within the residence, or lurking nearby? This unresolved question necessitated a meticulous sweep of the property, demanding heightened vigilance from every officer present. Amidst the carnage, a faint glimmer of hope emerged regarding Brenda's condition, and in the house, police are pretty shocked to find that Brenda is still alive considering the amount of blood on scene. This revelation spoke volumes about Brenda's incredible resilience, but also about the sheer brutality of the attack. To survive such an assault, to cling to life despite the massive amount of blood, defied immediate expectation and highlighted the severity of her injuries. This shocking discovery energized the life-saving efforts. So they try and do anything at all to stop the bleeding, to keep her alive as long as possible. This dedication to preserving life underscored the inherent humanity within the emergency response. Every possible measure, no matter how desperate, was employed to give Brenda a fighting chance, transforming the officers from initial responders to improvised medical personnel in a desperate race against imminent death. To truly understand the profound human cost of this tragedy, it is imperative to first appreciate the vibrant life that was so cruelly threatened. Brenda Doyle was born on March 19, 1969 in Salem, Ohio. This provided a concrete origin for the victim, rooting her firmly in time and place. Salem, Ohio, her birthplace, became the starting point of a life marked by excellence and an unwavering commitment to service. From an early age, Brenda demonstrated remarkable intellectual prowess and unwavering dedication to her studies. She was a high achiever from an early age, excelling in Catholic school and going on to graduate from the University of Akron with honors. Her trajectory through academia was exemplary, signaling a diligent and intelligent individual. Her success in Catholic school reflected not only academic aptitude, but also potentially a grounding in moral and ethical values that would later define her career and personal life. Graduating with honors from the University of Akron was a significant accomplishment, affirming her academic rigor and intellectual capabilities, setting a high standard for her future endeavors. She had her degree in early childhood education. This specific field of study indicated an innate calling to nurture, guide, and protect the youngest members of society, a theme that would resonate throughout her life. Brenda channeled her educational achievements directly into a career dedicated to helping others, embodying her intrinsic desire to make a positive impact on the world. She then proceeded to work at Akron Children's Hospital as a child life specialist. This professional choice was profoundly indicative of her compassionate spirit. As a child life specialist, Brenda's role was to support children and their families through challenging medical experiences, a vocation that required immense empathy, resilience, and capacity for human connection. The Akron Children's Hospital became the physical manifestation of her dedication, a place where she could actively alleviate suffering and bring comfort. When she started there, she was dealing basically with adolescents and children that dealt with a cancer of blood disorders. Her work involved facing some of the most heart-wrenching scenarios imaginable, guiding young individuals and their families through the terrifying journey of cancer and debilitating blood disorders. This specific area of focus highlighted her capacity for emotional strength and her ability to navigate profound grief and fear alongside her patients, a testament to her deep well of humanity. Brenda's personal life was just as fulfilling, built upon genuine connection and a loving partnership. I met Brenda in 1995 through some mutual friends. This was a setup. The narrative shifted to Steve Powell, her future husband, who recalled their serendipitous meeting. A setup orchestrated by mutual friends suggested a shared social circle and an intentional effort to bring two compatible individuals together. We went on our first date as a group of us. The informal, group setting for their initial encounter reflected a relaxed beginning, allowing their personalities to shine through naturally without the pressure of a more formal. Steve's immediate attraction to Brenda was clear. Her smile is what really attracted me to her the first time. She just had that little snarky, sarcastic-looking little smile on her face that she just always seemed happy. This description of her snarky, sarcastic-looking little smile conveyed not just physical attraction, but also an appreciation for her vibrant personality, her wit, and her inherent joyfulness, an indelible image of a woman who exuded positivity. Brenda's confidence and unwavering sense of purpose extended to her relationships, signaling a woman who knew what she wanted and pursued it with certainty. 27-year-old Brenda was equally sure-footed in her relationship. Her age at the time, 27, suggested a mature individual, someone who approached life and love with a sense of clarity and conviction, eschewing wavering indecision. Her steadfastness was matched by Steve's commitment. She and 30-year-old Steve Powell married in 1996, just a year after their first date together. The swift progression from their initial meeting in 1995 to their marriage in 1996 underscored the strength and immediacy of their connection. Their love story moved with a confident, joyful pace, suggesting a deep recognition of compatibility and shared values. The joyous culmination was a testament to their broad social circles and their desire to celebrate with everyone they cherished. We couldn't really make a decision on who wasn't going to be in the wedding, so I think we put all of our friends in. I think I had 7 groomsmen and she had 7 bridesmaids. So it was a large, fun wedding. This detail vividly painted a picture of a well-loved couple, surrounded by a multitude of friends and family, their wedding a grand, celebratory affair reflecting the abundance of their social connections and the joyous anticipation of their future together. The size and atmosphere, large, fun wedding, emphasized the love and community that surrounded Brenda and Steve as they embarked on their married life. Their family blossomed with the arrival of children, anchoring their lives in the joys and responsibilities of parenthood. Brenda and Steve went on to have 2 children together. Their household expanded, becoming a nurturing environment for a growing family. Their daughter, Sydney, was born in 2000, and 3 years later, they had a son. The birth of Sydney in 2000 marked the beginning of her unique story, followed by her younger brother 3 years later. For the subsequent 2 decades, Brenda masterfully balanced her deeply meaningful career with her unwavering devotion to her family. For the next 2 decades, Brenda split her time between work and family. This dedication to both her professional calling and her roles as a wife and mother highlighted her incredible capacity for organization, her energy, and her unwavering commitment to the various facets of her rich life. Brenda's career, while immensely rewarding, was also profoundly challenging, demanding a level of emotional fortitude few possess. Brenda had one of the most difficult jobs I could ever imagine. She had to sit with families and talk to them about a cancer diagnosis, about chemotherapy, with kids who were going through the worst time in their life. This testimonial powerfully underscored the immense emotional labor inherent in her profession. Imagine the raw vulnerability, the despair, and the questions she had to navigate daily with frightened children and heartbroken parents. Her work required not just medical understanding, but an extraordinary capacity for empathy and resilience in the face of suffering. Yet, Despite the inherent difficulties, Brenda performed her duties with grace and exceptional skill. Brenda was amazing. She was loved universally by everyone that she worked with. The unanimous sentiment of her colleagues and the term universally loved spoke volumes about her. Profound positive impact on her workplace. She was not just respected, she was cherished, a beacon of compassion and professionalism in an often somber environment. Her profound capacity for nurturing, honed through her professional experiences, translated seamlessly into her role as a mother. Brenda's personality as a mother was very nurturing. This description highlighted her inherent tenderness, her protective instincts, and her dedication to fostering a supportive and loving environment for her children. I think from all those years of being at the hospital and dealing with the children that were there, I think she just did all she could to protect her child and did everything to make sure that, they grew up healthy. Her experiences with vulnerable children in a medical setting likely amplified her protective impulses, imbuing her mothering with an even deeper sense of urgency and devotion. She strived to create an insulated, safe haven for her children, ensuring their physical and emotional well-being above all else. The bond between Brenda and Sydney, specifically, was characterized by an extraordinary closeness that transcended typical familial dynamics. Brenda and Sydney were especially close. It was almost like sisters that they just really got along. This deep, almost peer-like connection suggested not only profound affection, but also shared interests, easy companionship, and perhaps an open, unreserved channel of communication. It painted a picture of a relationship founded on mutual respect and genuine friendship, beyond the conventional roles of parent and child. Indeed, Sydney often reflected her mother's vibrant personality. Sydney was the mini-me of Brenda. They had the same personalities. This delightful comparison indicated profound mirroring of characteristics, a natural inheritance of traits that made Sydney a recognizable reflection of her mother, extending their bond beyond shared interests to a fundamental alignment of disposition. The constant communication between them further cemented their close relationship. I remember her and her mom were always texting. In the modern era, incessant texting is a clear indicator of frequent, casual, and often intimate communication, signaling that they remain connected throughout their day, sharing moments and thoughts regardless of physical distance. Sydney's admiration for her mother was profound. I think Sydney really did look up to her mom, wanted to be how Brenda was, be there to help people, to always put others first. This deep respect and desire to emulate Brenda's altruistic nature showcased profound influence Brenda had on Sydney, shaping her values and aspirations. Sydney aspired to embody the very essence of her mother's character, compassionate, self-sacrificing, and committed to aiding others, mirroring the noble path Brenda had forged in her career. Sydney, like her mother, seemed to possess a similar drive for excellence, channeling her energies into both academics and athletics. Sydney appeared to share her mother's drive and ambition as well. This commonality suggested a shared inner fire, a determination to succeed and excel in various pursuits. Sydney's grades always were good, and all throughout elementary school and high school, she did a little bit of everything sports-wise and ended up really settling in on soccer, which she excelled at. Her consistently strong academic performance underscored her intellectual capacity and diligent work ethic. Her wide participation in sports-wise activities during her formative years indicated a well-rounded and energetic young person. Her eventual dedication to soccer and her demonstrable excellence in it highlighted a capacity for focused commitment and competitive drive. Her teammates often looked to her as an exemplar, recognizing her innate leadership qualities. We were teammates. Sydney was a ball of fire. This descriptor, a ball of fire, evoked an image of boundless energy, spirited determination, and an infectious enthusiasm. She was very small, but on the field, she was one of our best players. So we always looked up to her, as a role model or as someone who would set an example on the field. Her physical stature, very small, only served to magnify the impressiveness of her on-field prowess, suggesting that her athletic success was rooted in skill, tenacity, and strategic intelligence rather than sheer physical dominance. Being regarded as one of our best players and looked up to as a role model attested to her inspirational influence, embodying the very qualities of ambition and dedication she shared with her mother. Sydney's impressive academic and athletic career culminated in a significant milestone, opening the door to higher education. Sydney's high school academic career was impressive enough to earn her a presidential scholarship to the University of Mount Union. This prestigious presidential scholarship was a testament to her sustained excellence, not only recognizing her academic achievements, but also underscoring considerable potential the university saw in her. It represented a financial and academic endorsement, a tangible reward for her years of diligent effort. She moved into campus housing in the fall of 2018, but maintained frequent contact with her family. This transition into campus housing marked her entry into adulthood and greater independence, a significant step in the life of any young person. Yet, her consistent communication with her family, a familiar refrain from their always texting, showed that this newfound independence did not diminish her profound connections to her loved ones, particularly her mother. Sydney embraced her new collegiate chapter with palpable enthusiasm, a testament to her bright and optimistic outlook. Sydney was very excited to go to college. I think she was ready to spread her wings a little bit and go out there. Her excitement was a natural response to the prospect of new experiences, intellectual challenges, and personal growth. The imagery of spread her wings perfectly captured her yearning for autonomy, for exploring new horizons, and forging her own path in the world. A healthy developmental stage for any young adult. Her initial academic aspirations reflected a hands-on, physically oriented interest. She was going to get into something sports, physical fitness, training related, and she eventually switched out of that to psychiatry. This initial inclination towards sports, physical fitness, training related studies aligned with her athletic background and suggested an interest in physical well-being and peak performance. The eventual notable shift to psychiatry represented a significant change in academic direction, moving from the tangible physical world to the complex, intricate realm of the human mind and its disorders, a shift that would later take on a poignant, almost prescient, significance given the tragic events. By her sophomore year, Sydney appeared to be thriving, continuing her path of academic and personal growth, seemingly flourishing in her collegiate environment. By her sophomore year, Sydney seemed to be flourishing, and her relationship with her mother was closer than ever. This impression of flourishing painted a picture of a successful transition to university life, indicating that she was adapting well to the demands of higher education and embracing her independence. The reaffirmation that her bond with Brenda was closer than ever suggested a continued evolution of their unique like sisters dynamic, a powerful, unbreakable connection that served as an emotional anchor. The geographical proximity of Mount Union to the family home allowed for these strong ties to be physically reinforced. Mount Union is approximately 40 minutes from where we live. This relatively short distance made spontaneous visits and easy travel feasible, enabling Sydney to return frequently. She would come home sporadically on the weekends since it was so close. These weekend trips provided crucial opportunities for her to reconnect with her family, recharge, and maintain those vital emotional links. Crucially, Brenda remained Sydney's primary confidant and trusted advisor. If Sydney had a concern, Brenda would be the first one she would talk to. They really talked, and they got along. This confirmed Brenda's pivotal role in Sydney's life. solidifying her as the go-to person for worries, dilemmas, and the general navigation of young adulthood. The description, "they really talked and they got along," underscored the depth and openness of their communication, implying a relationship free from significant hidden resentments or unspoken tensions, further magnifying the perplexing tragedy that was to come. Yet, despite this outwardly strong foundation, this picture of familial love and individual success was irrevocably shattered by violence. But now, the mother and daughter have been involved in a vicious attack, leaving Brenda clinging to life and Sydney traumatized. The stark contrast between the joyful narrative and this brutal reality was heart-wrenching. The vicious attack transformed their world into a scene of unspeakable horror, shattering the tranquility of their suburban existence. Brenda's perilous state, clinging to life, brought with it an agonizing uncertainty, a desperate prayer for survival. Sydney, while physically less injured in a visible sense, was left traumatized, an emotional and psychological wound that might prove to be as devastating, if not more so, than her mother's physical injuries. As first responders heroically battled to save Brenda and comfort Sydney, another critical character raced towards the scene, pulled by an invisible thread of dread and familial concern. While first responders tend to Sydney and Brenda, her father, Steve Powell, races home. Steve's frantic journey epitomized a sudden, terrifying shift from routine to crisis that impacts every member of family in such a situation. The description, "races home," conveyed the urgent, almost desperate, speed with which he attempted to reach his loved ones, an instinctual surge driven by deep paternal love and growing fear. I got a call from my friend, who happened to be a police officer. Heard a call go out with my address. This detail added another layer to the narrative, revealing how Steve received the initial, chilling notification, not through a formal police message, but through a personal connection, highlighting the devastating intimacy of the situation. To hear one's home address mentioned over the police scanner, even indirectly, is a unique and profoundly disturbing way to learn a crisis. Steve's arrival at the chaotic scene presented him with a harrowing image of his daughters. Distress. Sydney was down by the mailbox when I got home, and she was almost shaking. Her position, down by the mailbox, physically separated from the house and its interior horror, yet still very much within the perimeter of the crime scene, conveyed a sense of isolation and disorientation. Her visible physical reaction, almost shaking, provided a direct observation of her profound emotional and psychological distress, confirming the deep impact of the events she had just experienced. Steve's initial confusion was profound, a natural human response to confronting such a nightmarish, incomprehensible situation. I had no idea what was going on. This honest admission underscored the initial lack of information and the overwhelming sense of bewilderment that often characterizes the immediate aftermath of a violent crime. As logic struggles to make sense of the nonsensical, the protective cordoning off of the crime scene, while a necessary step in investigative protocol, added another layer of frustration and anguish for the distraught father. Coming up, a witness's erratic behavior perplexes officers, and when tragedy strikes, detectives must grapple with a harsh reality. This narrative foreshadowed the emerging complexities surrounding Sydney's testimony and the inevitable confrontation with the most painful of truths. The phrase, "erratic behavior perplexes officers," further emphasized the investigative challenge. Sydney posed, signaling that her actions went beyond typical trauma, dipping into territories that were difficult to interpret and potentially suspicious. The mention of "tragedy strikes" served as a grim premonition of Brenda's ultimate fate, setting the stage for the raw emotional fallout that would inevitably follow. Detectives grappling with a harsh reality suggested a recognition that this case involved not just facts and evidence, but profound human suffering and the unraveling of familial bonds, a dimension of police work that demands both professional detachment and deep empathy. Steve's personal experience of the immediate aftermath was understandably fragmented and imbued with an overwhelming sense of shock and disorientation. I'm sure at that point, I ended up going into shock, and then after that, it's pretty much a blur. This deeply personal account of his mental state, acknowledging a probable entry into shock, eloquently described the mind's natural defense mechanism against unbearable pain and chaos. The ensuing blur was a common cognitive phenomenon in high-stress, traumatic situations, where the brain struggles to process and retain precise memories, consolidating a jumbled sequence of events into a less distinct, foggy recollection. This psychological impact would inevitably affect his capacity to provide a coherent, detailed narrative of the initial moments, understandable given the magnitude of what he was confronting. The gravity of Brenda's condition was paramount. 50-year-old Brenda Powell is in critical condition after she was attacked during an apparent break-in. Her age, 50-year-old, added another layer to the tragedy, representing a life vibrant and engaged, cruelly interrupted. The reiteration of her critical condition underscored the immediate and life-threatening danger she was in. The lingering term apparent break-in still hung over the scene, an unconfirmed but potent initial theory that guided the early moments of the investigation, shaping the officer's initial understanding of the threat. Brenda's husband, Steve Powell, had just arrived home, entering a landscape transformed by unimaginable horror, only to find his daughter Sydney in a state of profound shock. Her husband, Steve Powell, has just arrived home to find his daughter Sydney in a state of shock. This poignant scene highlighted the immediate, crushing weight of the unfolding disaster upon the family. With Steve caught between the urgent concern for his wife and the alarming distress of his daughter, Steve's desperate instinct was to enter his home, to be with his loved ones, to understand, to help. I tried to go up into the house, and I made it basically as far into front room as I could, and then they proceeded to escort me out of the house. This was the natural, instinctive reaction of a concerned family member, attempting to breach the perimeter of the burgeoning crime scene. However, the officers, adhering to strict protocol, recognized the critical need to preserve the integrity of the scene and prevent further contamination or distraction during the active life-saving efforts. The calm, authoritative instruction captured on body camera footage. Yes, you do. Outside. All the way back to the right. You need to stay outside. Please have a seat. Although delivered with necessary firmness, conveyed the gravity of the situation to Steve. The officers, while recognizing his understandable distress, had to maintain a secure environment, separating him from the unfolding medical crisis and the accumulating evidence. His presence, while emotionally desired, would have compromised the meticulous processes of law enforcement and medical aid. Segregated from the immediate crisis, Steve sought to understand, to gather information about his fragmented family. My friend got there, and they took me back to his car. Very frustrating to not have any information what was going on, where your daughter's laying down by the mailbox, and you don't know where your wife is. The isolating experience of being confined to his friend's car, while understandable from a procedural standpoint, intensified his anguish. The inability to ascertain the condition or location of his loved ones, particularly Sydney, who he last saw laying down by the mailbox in distress, created a profound void of information. This vacuum fueled an intense frustration, a desperate yearning for knowledge amidst overwhelming uncertainty, compounding the emotional trauma of the moment. It spoke to the inherent conflict between human needs for connection and transparency during a crisis and the rigid, often uncommunicative demands of crime scene management. Amidst this maelstrom of fear and uncertainty, a fragile thread of hope concerning Brenda's life persisted. Now, Brenda didn't look good. However, one of the paramedics was able to find this faint pulse. So based on that, they rushed her to the hospital. The understatement, didn't look good, belied the horrifying reality of her critical injuries. But the crucial discovery of this faint pulse became a pivotal point, signaling that life still flickered. This professional confirmation, however slight, was enough to activate immediate, high-priority medical transport. Being rushed to the hospital meant her only chance for survival now rested with the intensive care of trauma specialists, underscoring the severity of her condition and the desperate fight to keep her alive. Sydney, on the other hand, presented an entirely different medical challenge. Her distress rooted deeply in psychological disarray. Sydney is completely experiencing a psychotic break. She's completely catatonic. She continues to mumble kind of nonsensically. This was not mere emotional upset. This was a severe mental health crisis. The diagnosis of a psychotic break described a profound disruption in her perception of reality, a detachment from the rational world. Her catatonic state, previously observed, was reaffirmed and deepened, indicating an inability to move, speak, or respond normally. Her nonsensical mumbling further underscored her disorientation, rendering her an unreliable, fragmented source of information in her immediate post-incident state. She's likely going in and out of things, and she sees as evidence of a terrible crime around her. This assessment offered a psychological interpretation of her erratic behavior, suggesting intermittent periods of awareness interspersed with periods of profound confusion, a fractured consciousness grappling with the horror of the visible scene. The attempts to elicit coherent information from Sydney during this fragile period proved largely fruitless, further highlighting her psychological instability. The police, confronted with Sydney's distress, made a concerted effort to communicate, recorded again by the immediacy of body camera footage. Sydney, Sydney, the repeated, gentle calling of her name was an attempt to break through the veil of her dissociation, to reestablish a connection. What's going on with Sydney? What's going on? Huh? The persistent questioning from the officer and the distressed queries from her father, Steve, reflected a desperate need to comprehend her condition and the preceding events. She was just laying there shaking and climbing the street, wasn't mumbling, wasn't saying anything. Something definitely was not right. It was not normal behavior. She just not acted right? No, she's not acting right. Steve's observations of her shaking and climbing the street, likely clinging or pulling at something on the ground, a behavioral manifestation of catatonia, and her silent unresponsiveness contradicted her earlier, fragmented statements inside the house, his emphatic assertions that something definitely was not right, and it was not normal behavior, provided a parent's intuitive assessment of a child in profound distress, a stark realization that her mental state was dangerously compromised. This emotional clarity from her father underscored the severe deviation from Sydney's usual personality. Given her profoundly unstable condition, immediate medical attention for Sydney also became a critical priority, not only for her immediate physical health, but also for her mental well-being. All right, what was she involved with? What is this? Well, we don't know. We couldn't really determine at the scene what exactly her injuries were, but one of the paramedics' crews looked at her, and they ended up taking her to a hospital to get examined. The officers' continued bewilderment about what she was involved with reflected the lingering ambiguity surrounding her role. Was she purely a victim, or something more? Their inability to determine at the scene what exactly her injuries were necessitated a thorough medical evaluation. The decision by a paramedic's crew to transport her to a hospital to get examined acknowledged both the potential for undetected physical trauma and, crucially, the undeniable evidence of her severe psychological breakdown. This transport moved her away from the immediate scene, placing her under professional medical care, where her unique, complex needs could be addressed. An officer escorted Sydney, hoping to gain more information. This continuous attempt to glean facts, even from a person in profound distress, reflected the persistent investigative imperative. seeking any coherent fragments of truth that might emerge from her state of shock and confusion. With Brenda and Sydney safely, albeit critically, en route to their respective medical facilities, the rigorous, methodical phase of the criminal investigation could formally begin at the scene. With Brenda and Sydney both on the way to the emergency room, investigators began searching the house for evidence. This critical transition allowed the police to shift from emergency intervention to forensic examination, a systematic effort to meticulously collect and document every tangible clue. When I arrived, I met with Officer Legacy, and he kind of took me through the path that he took through the house. The lead investigator's immediate rendezvous with Officer Legacy, the first responder, was crucial for reconstructing the initial moments, establishing the sequence of discoveries, and understanding the layout and initial observations. This walkthrough, following the initial ingress path, allowed the primary investigator to mentally recreate the officer's entry and their initial perceptions, offering invaluable context for the subsequent forensic sweep. The initial assessment of the crime scene revealed stark discrepancies with Sydney's narrative, immediately raising the first red flags for the seasoned investigators. We were just trying to figure out, okay, what are we dealing with? We know Sydney was screaming about somebody breaking in, but besides the bedroom and the broken windows, there was nothing out of place. This preliminary observation was crucial, the absence of a general ransacking, or obvious signs of forced entry beyond the two specific points, began to unravel the intruder theory. A typical break-in for burglary or robbery usually involves a broader disruption, a search for valuables, the very localized nature of the disturbance, predominantly in the bedroom and around the broken windows, hinted at a more confined, personal conflict rather than a widespread intrusion. I didn't see any signs of any struggle or anything like that inside the kitchen. And then he took me down the hallway that separates the kitchen and the bedroom. This lack of struggle in other areas, particularly the kitchen, a common point of domestic interaction, was significant as the officers moved deeper into the house. Following the grim path toward the primary scene of the violence, the trail of evidence became more defined. He was pointing out different blood smears, appear to be blood smears on both sides of the wall. This observation, carefully noted, revealed movement during or after the attack. Blood smears on both sides of the wall suggested either a struggle involving contact with walls or movement of an injured party, or a person with blood on their hands touching surfaces as they navigated confined space. This provided a visual narrative of the immediate post-assault environment. Then came the indelible image of the horror itself. I just remember turning the corner and looking into the bedroom and just seeing all that blood. It's one of the worst things I've been to. This raw, honest testimonial from an experienced investigator underscored a profound impact of the scene, highlighting the sheer volume of blood that bore witness to the horrific brutality of the attack. To deem it one of the worst things I've been to indicated a level of violence and devastation that shocked even those accustomed to the darker side of human nature. Crucially, the scene also yielded the suspected instruments of the brutal attack. There was an iron skillet that was on the floor near to where Brenda was, and also a knife. It looked like to us that these might have been the possible weapons that were used. The discovery of both an iron skillet and a knife immediately transformed them into items of critical forensic interest. These were not items commonly associated with an external intruder who would typically bring their own weapons. The presence of common household implements as potential weapons further chipped away at the initial intruder narrative, raising uncomfortable questions about their origin and ownership. It suggested that the weapons were drawn from within the household itself, implicating someone familiar with the home. In addition to these potentially vital weapons, another significant piece of evidence was recovered. In addition to the weapons, detectives also find a cell phone Brenda was using when she was attacked. This was a gold mine of information. The cell phone represented a direct link to Brenda's last coherent moments before the assault, capable of revealing critical details about her final communication, the timing of events, and even, potentially, the immediate sounds of the attack itself. It was a digital witness, holding encrypted answers within its circuits. The investigators, now armed with initial observations, began to formulate their primary lines of inquiry. Wrestling with the ambiguities presented by the crime scene, we're thinking, what happened? Are we dealing with somebody that broke in and attacked them for a burglary type situation? What about Sydney? Was Sydney involved in this? Does she have any information? These questions reflected the fundamental dichotomies at the heart of the burgeoning case. The initial burglary-type situation with an external perpetrator was still a viable theory, albeit weakened by some observations. But the uncomfortable alternative, what about Sydney? Was Sydney involved in this? Slowly began to assert itself as a profound and troubling possibility, demanding serious consideration. The desperate need for any information from Sydney underscored her central, yet profoundly perplexing, role in the immediate aftermath of the tragedy. Meanwhile, a crucial component of the initial investigation involved gathering any potential clues from Sydney during her transport to the hospital, despite her erratic state. It's about an 8 or 9 minute drive to the hospital. The police officers trying to figure out what's going on, asking Sydney some basic questions. This limited time frame and the urgency of the situation meant that any snippets of information, however small, could be significant. The officer, diligently performing his duty, continued, asking Sydney some basic questions, attempting to pierce through her profound disorientation. However, her responses offered little clarity. She's not making any sense. She has no touch with reality at all. This reiterated assessment confirmed her severely compromised mental state, rendering her incapable of providing a coherent narrative in those critical moments, a profound impediment to the early stages of the investigation. From the ambulance, Sydney is then taken to the psychiatric ward. This direct transfer underscored the severity of her mental health crisis, indicating that her immediate needs were psychological and behavioral, rather than purely physical. This decision, while necessary for Sydney's well-being, effectively sidelined her as a primary source of immediate investigative information. Despite her profound mental distress, a recurring theme emerged from Sydney's fragmented utterances, echoing a perceived external threat. As Sydney is interacting with officers and her dad, something that we hear her say over and over again is, "Get out of the house! Get out of the house!" This persistent, almost obsessive, repetition to get out of the house firmly established her unwavering belief, or fabricated claim, that an unwelcome presence had intruded into their home. Even in her disordered state, this specific directive remained a dominant mental refrain. The police obviously don't know if she's a victim too. She is clearly in a state of shock. This honest acknowledgement from law enforcement captured the profound ambiguity of Sydney's situation. Her genuine state of shock was undeniable, making it incredibly difficult to discern whether her claims were the authentic testimony of a traumatized victim or the disoriented expressions of someone deeply implicated in the violence. The immediate attempts to extract more detailed information from Sydney at the hospital proved fruitless, forcing a tactical retreat from immediate questioning. She really wasn't focusing on the detectives. She really wasn't acknowledging that they were even present. So we decided not to ask her any more questions at that point. This practical decision was an acknowledgement of her severe mental state. Her inability to focus or even acknowledge the presence of investigators rendered any immediate interrogation unproductive, perhaps even unethical. It would be akin to speaking to a phantom, expecting a coherent reply. We needed more information. Sydney wasn't going to be able to tell us anything. We're going to have to figure out other ways about what happened. This pragmatic conclusion forced the investigative team to pivot, to rely less on direct testimony from Sydney and more on the meticulous collection and interpretation of forensic evidence, and indirect forms of corroboration, shifting their strategic approach to understanding the tragedy. While Brenda bravely clung to life in the emergency room and Sydney battled her profound psychological crisis, detectives turned their attention to Brenda's husband, Steve, hoping he could illuminate the shadowy events of the day. In the emergency room, doctors are doing everything they can to save Brenda Powell's life, her 19-year-old daughter. Sydney is being treated for wounds of her own, but she's still unable to tell anyone what happened. Investigators hope Brenda's husband, Steve, can provide some insight. This established the urgent medical drama unfolding for both mother and daughter, while also highlighting the informational vacuum created by Sydney's mental state. Steve, as the last fully lucid family member to have had contact, became the vital link, the potential key to unlocking the puzzle of the day. When they finally took me to the police station, they basically took a statement on what transpired up until the time that I got there, any communication I had with Brenda or Sydney up until that moment. Steve's account was meticulously taken, focusing on the chronological sequence of events and any preceding interactions he had with his wife and daughter, seeking any anomalies or clues in their recent communications. Steve's recollection of the day began innocuously, a portrait of typical domestic routine before the storm. Steve says the day began like any other. He and Brenda had breakfast, then both headed into work. This detail established the perceived normalcy, setting a baseline against which the later chaos could be measured. A shared breakfast and heading off to work were quotidian rhythms of life, reinforcing the profound, unexpected nature of the violence that was to follow. However, Sydney's imminent arrival home for spring break introduced a critical administrative task, one that would unravel the delicate facade she had built. Sydney was scheduled to visit that weekend for spring break, which reminded Steve to pay her tuition for following semester. This routine parental duty became the unforeseen catalyst for revealing Sydney's profound secret. The financial transaction, a common responsibility, inadvertently pulled back the curtain on a carefully constructed lie. The university's response to Steve's tuition inquiry delivered a shocking revelation, striking at the very foundation of Sydney's assumed reality. The university informed Steve that due to poor grades, his daughter had been academically suspended 2 months earlier. This information landed with the force of a bombshell, irrevocably shattering the image of a flourishing college student. The phrase, academically suspended 2 months earlier, was a precise and devastating truth, revealing a significant lapse in her academic standing. This disclosure raised immediate, troubling questions. Why hadn't Sydney told them? What had she been doing during this time? The subsequent discovery, aided by technology, deepened the shock. Steve and Brenda had installed Life 360 on their phone, so they could see where Sydney was at all times. So Steve sees on his phone that his daughter's home, and he thinks to himself, why is she home? Life 360, a common family safety app, inadvertently provided undeniable proof of Sydney's deception, placing her geographically at home during what should have been a normal college day. Steve's internal question, why is she home, encapsulated his immediate bewilderment. The stark contradiction between what he believed to be true and what the technology unequivocally revealed. The implications of this deception began to dawn on Steve, creating a wave of profound confusion and concern. In shock, since the winter quarter ended, she wasn't even enrolled and they never knew about it. His state of shock was entirely justifiable. The betrayal of trust, coupled with a profound academic failure, was immense. The realization that Sydney wasn't even enrolled after the winter quarter ended meant she had been deliberately concealing her true academic status for an extended period, living a complex and elaborate lie. The emotional burden of this discovery compelled Steve to share the devastating news with Brenda. Steve called Brenda and made Brenda aware of what's going on, and he decides to go back to work. The weight of such information could not be borne alone. Brenda, as Sydney's primary confidant and mother, needed to be informed immediately. This call from Steve to Brenda became a critical pre-assault interaction, establishing the precise moment Brenda became aware of Sydney's profound deception. His decision to go back to work reflected perhaps a temporary attempt to process the information, assuming Brenda would handle the immediate confrontation, tragically unaware of the violent confrontation it would trigger. The revelation of Sydney's academic status naturally prompted Brenda to return home, seeking to address the grave issue with her daughter. Now the mom, Brenda Powell, is coming home because she obviously wants to know what's going on as well. Brenda's swift return was a predictable, maternal response to a profound crisis concerning her child. Her desire to know what's going on directly from Sydney was natural, reflecting a parent's instinct to confront and understand a child's deeply troubling behavior. According to Steve's precise recollection, this conversation, unknowingly, was set to take a terrifying turn. According to Steve, he received a call from Brenda at 11:49 a.m. to let him know she was pulling into the driveway. This specific time, 11:49 a.m., marked Brenda's final communication with her husband before the assault, a mundane update before she stepped into a landscape of unimaginable danger. Just an hour later, Steve received a call from his police officer friend, informing him that emergency services were being dispatched to his address, initiating his frantic race home and signaling the violent unraveling of their lives. A critical piece of information emerged from Steve's police interview, further strengthening the hypothesis of Sydney's involvement and undermining the intruder theory. When Mr. Powell told her that the police were on their way, she immediately said there was an intruder. She starts screaming. This was a pivotal moment. The rapid, almost reflexive declaration from Sydney. There was an intruder, directly after being told the police were imminent, carried significant weight. It could be interpreted as a desperate attempt to preemptively establish an alibi, to redirect blame rather than an unprompted cry for help. The subsequent screaming could be seen not just as genuine fear, but as a performative element designed to reinforce a narrative of a traumatic external event. Crucially, this direct account contradicted earlier expectations. But up until that point, there was no other 911 call from that address. The absolute absence of any emergency call made directly from the house prior to Steve informing Sydney of the impending police arrival was a profound analytical signal. If a genuine intruder had been present, and Brenda was screaming for help during the university call, why had Sydney not called for emergency assistance immediately after the phone went dead? The significant lack of a prior distress call profoundly impacted the investigators' understanding of events. So that was a huge piece of information that kind of directed us a little bit about what might have happened. The huge piece of information shifted the entire investigative focus, compelling detectives to look inward rather than outward for a perpetrator. With the intruder narrative rapidly weakening under the weight of these new insights, the focus of the investigation inexorably began to narrow. The focus became Sydney. This was a necessary and logical evolution in the investigative process. As the evidence started to converge on a distressed young woman who was the only one present, the crucial question that emerged, gnawing at the very fabric of the developing theory, was, why didn't she reach out for help? In a situation of undeniable and extreme violence, the absence of a 911 call, a fundamental and instinctual act of self-preservation or aid-seeking, became a gaping logical void. This lack of action, coupled with the strained conversation Steve reported, painted a deeply troubling picture. Further examination of the crime scene provided additional forensic complexities that continued to cast doubt upon the intruder narrative. Examining the scene itself with the broken glass, there was blood inside. Outside, it's kind of odd to have blood on both sides of the window. This particular detail about the broken glass and the distribution of blood inside, outside, the window was profoundly anomalous for a typical forced entry. If an intruder broke the Window from the outside. The blood should primarily be on the exterior from the point of entry, perhaps on the interior as they entered. To find it on both sides suggested a more complex interaction, perhaps the glass being broken from the inside and outward, or a struggle around the window itself, involving a person who was already bleeding. This forensic incongruity served as a powerful counter-indicator to the simple intruder broke in narrative. It was the opinion of all of us that the intruder scenario was highly unlikely. The unanimous agreement among the experienced investigators that the intruder scenario was highly unlikely marked a crucial turning point. This collective professional assessment, based on both the circumstantial evidence and forensic observations, largely discredited the initial working hypothesis, making the shift in focus to Sydney an investigative imperative. As Steve's interview progressed, victim assistance workers arrived, embodying the broader community's compassion and offering their support during his unthinkable ordeal. This moment of empathetic intervention was swiftly followed by an update from the hospital, information that was both anticipated and dreaded, yet tragically definitive. As the interview progresses, victim assistance workers come to offer Steve their support just before detectives receive word from the hospital. This shift in narrative structure mirrored the intense emotional pendulum swinging from moments of comfort to sharp instances of distressing news. The subsequent conversation between an officer and Steve, though painful, unveiled the tragic reality. What happened? Steve's raw question was a desperate plea for clarity amidst profound bewilderment. We're not sure. It looks like I don't think someone broke into the house. I don't know if your wife and daughter got in the line. The officer's hesitant, uncertain language reflected the sensitivity of the impending news. Try to gently steer Steve away from the intruder narrative towards a more painful truth. The phrase, "I don't think someone broke into the house," was a soft but direct dismantling of the alibi Sydney had provided. The subsequent suggestion, "I don't know if your wife and daughter got in the line," indicated the horrifying possibility of an internal family conflict, a thought that would have been unbearable for Steve to immediately confront. The window was broken, but there's no forced entry into the house. The window was broken, but nobody actually came through that window. The sliding door was on the bottom. The officer elaborated on the physical evidence, meticulously explaining the crucial distinction. Damage did not equal intrusion. The broken window and sliding door were confirmed, but the lack of actual forced entry through them and the observation that the sliding door was on the bottom imply it might have been dislodged or intentionally broken from inside, definitively sealed the fate of the intruder theory. The forensic details now unambiguously pointed away from an external threat. Steve's profound confusion and emotional disbelief were palpable. Did your wife and daughter ever have, no heat? No. I'm just trying to figure out in my head, what actually could have happened, because nothing was adding up to me. I had nothing to go on. His desperate query, did your wife and daughter ever have, no heat? Was an understandable attempt to seek any pre-existing conflict, any known tension that could possibly explain such incomprehensible violence. His emphatic denial of any prior serious conflict, no, underscored the shocking nature of the emerging reality, the overwhelming feeling that nothing was adding up to me and having nothing to go unexpressed. The fundamental human struggle to comprehend the utterly illogical and devastating. The culmination of these overwhelming events delivered a crushing blow to Steve Powell. I'm sure at that point I ended up going into shock of some sort, because I don't remember talking to them. After that, I had to inform my son of what had happened. Then after that, it's pretty much a blur. His admission of entering shock of some sort and the subsequent memory blur were poignant, testaments to the mind's protective mechanism against insufferable grief and trauma. The act of having to inform my son of what had happened would have been an excruciating, unbearable responsibility, forcing him to extend the circle of grief to his other child, propagating the devastation further within their shattered family. From that point forward, the memories became indistinct, consumed by the overwhelming tide of anguish. While Steve wrestled with the unimaginable loss and the devastating implications, investigators were forced to recalibrate their understanding of the crime, confronted with the agonizing reality that Brenda's life had been tragically extinguished. While Steve copes with the heartbreaking news, investigators must reassess the situation. The pivot from injury to fatality meant the case was no longer about preventing death, but about prosecuting a murder, elevating the investigative urgency and the gravity of the potential charges. The lack of forced entry into the home, combined with signs of an altercation, suggests a painful possibility. This was a forensic conclusion, chillingly precise, the absence of legitimate forced entry, contrasted with clear signs of an altercation, the blood, the weapons, the broken windows that proved non-ingress points, inexorably pointed to an internal, familial perpetrator. It shifted the primary hypothesis from external threat to domestic violence of the most extreme kind, a painful possibility for all involved. The realization began to dawn upon Steve, even if he instinctively resisted it, that Sydney was involved. I think he had some kind of idea that Sydney was responsible for this. I don't think he thought that there was an intruder, even though he might not want to believe it. This nuanced psychological assessment of Steve's internal conflict captured the profound difficulty of reconciling paternal love with horrific accusations. Intellectually, the evidence mounted against the intruder theory, nudging him towards the unthinkable conclusion of Sydney's culpability. Yet emotionally, he might not want to believe it, illustrating the deep human instinct to protect one's child, to resist a monstrous truth, even when logic argues otherwise. From a legal standpoint, the situation was clear. At that point, we know we're dealing with a homicide investigation. The death of Brenda officially escalated the case to a homicide, initiating the full suite of legal and investigative protocols associated with murder. It was just very unusual that we're trying to piece together, okay, was there an intruder or did Sydney do this? The persistent, unsettling dichotomy between the two theories, intruder or did Sydney do this, although leaning heavily toward the latter, still required careful, meticulous, and conclusive verification. With Brenda's life tragically concluded, and the intruder theory thoroughly debunked, despite her claims of a break-in, Sydney Powell has become an unexpected person of interest in her mother's murder. This marked a grim and pivotal shift in Sydney's status, moving from potential victim and traumatized witness to the central focus of a homicide investigation. The inherent contradiction between her initial claims and the accumulating evidence made her unexpected status all the more poignant. To unravel the timeline and the nature of the immediate moments before and during the attack, detectives meticulously turned their attention to the digital footprints Brenda left behind. Since Brenda was on the phone with university administrators when she was attacked, detectives reviewed her cell phone records for more information. This was a crucial investigative step, recognizing the potential of Brenda's cell phone as a key forensic artifact, capable of providing an exact timeline and auditory evidence of the final seconds of her conversation. The analysis of Brenda's cell phone records yielded critical, irrefutable data that painted a harrowing timeline of the assault. What we know from looking at the cell phone records is there was about 3 minutes and 30 seconds between that first call and the second call, and what we know is all the injuries to Brenda happened within that 3 minutes and 30 seconds. This precise calculation, about 3 minutes and 30 seconds, was profoundly damning. It established a tight, frantic window during which the entirety of the brutal attack occurred, a terrifyingly short span of time for such devastating injuries to be inflicted. This exact temporal frame immediately narrowed the possibilities, and intensified the focus on who was present and what transpired in those fleeting moments. Investigators then sought to corroborate this digital timeline with the direct accounts of the individuals on the other end of the line, the deans at Mount Union. Investigators speak with the deans to corroborate. They were in the middle of a conversation with Brenda Powell, but then they heard thumping and screaming, and then the phone went dead. This oral testimony directly aligned with the cell phone records and Brenda's critical conversation. The dean's sensory recollection of thumping and screaming, followed by the abrupt silence of the phone went dead, provided powerful human validation of the violence Brenda endured. Their emotional distress in recalling this sequence was palpable. They were very emotional about it, and they just didn't know what to make of it. Their confusion and palpable distress underscored the shock they felt at witnessing such a violent interruption. But the most damning piece of information regarding Sydney's role emerged from the deans further attempts to reach Brenda. The deans say after the line went dead, they immediately tried to call back, and after a few attempts, someone answered, and what they describe as a calm voice, this is Brenda and Dean Gaffney and Dean Fraser. Having known Sydney as a student, they knew right away that that was Sydney. This was a forensic truth emerging through voice identification. The dean's immediate, natural instinct to immediately try to call back in concern for Brenda was crucial. The fact that someone answered after a few attempts already signaled an unusual delay and a distinct change in voice. The description of a calm voice claiming, "This is Brenda," was profoundly chilling. Dean Gaffney and Dean Fraser, knowing Sydney personally as a student, possessed a unique and critical ability to identify the deceptive voice. Their immediate recognition, they knew right away that that was Sydney, shattered any remaining doubt about Sydney's deliberate actions to cover up the event. They asked her, "Sydney, is that you?" And then the phone went dead again. This direct challenge, "Sydney, is that you?" and the subsequent immediate disconnection of the phone further solidified the impression of a deliberate deception, an attempt to hide the truth rather than seek help. This attempt at impersonation, particularly in the immediate aftermath of a brutal attack, fundamentally altered the investigators' perception of Sydney's initial behavior. Sydney's behavior on the phone where she says, "This is Brenda," where she's pretending to be her, saying everything's fine, it's a falsehood. This was a categorical rejection of her earlier claims of profound disassociation and pure victimhood, the act of pretending to be her mother, and the assurance that everything's fine was not merely a distortion of truth. It was a deliberate, calculating falsehood designed to conceal a horrific reality. The absence of any mention of an intruder during this call further discredited her original narrative. She never said anything about an intruder. So we began more and more as we looked into this that was unlikely and that Sydney was actually responsible for this. The methodical investigative process, by accumulating these stark contradictions and irrefutable facts, led to an inexorable conclusion. The unlikely intruder scenario was utterly baseless, and Sydney was actually responsible for this. Further forensic analysis of the crime scene corroborated these growing suspicions, providing tangible, irrefutable evidence. Forensic analysis seems to support police suspicions. This systematic scientific examination was vital in confirming or disproving the narrative unfolding. When the crime scene unit came, we started taking our time looking at the scene. This methodical, patient approach underscored the importance of precision in forensic work, ensuring every detail was cataloged. It appeared with the knife and the skillet that those most likely came from inside of the house. The identification of these items as common household implements, rather than external weapons brought in by an intruder, added another layer of compelling evidence against Sydney. This localized origin implied a perpetrator with intimate access to the home, reinforcing the domestic nature of the crime. However, the most definitive and unassailable evidence came in the form of specific physical identifiers found throughout the house. The most damning evidence is a set of bloody footprints in the house. We were able to eliminate any foreign shoe being involved. It was Sydney's. This was the incontrovertible proof. Bloody footprints. Visible movements to the horrific tableau of the crime scene became indelible marks of the perpetrator's presence. The rigorous process of forensic elimination, ensuring any foreign shoe was accounted for, definitively linked the crucial footprints to Sydney, sealing her physical presence at the heart of the violence. This was not a supposition. It was a scientifically established fact, tying her directly to the act. We knew that the main incident happened in the bedroom, and by observing all that blood all over the place in different locations throughout, it was clear to us that, Sydney had been moving throughout the house at different times. Before and after the police arrived. The widespread distribution of blood all over the place in different locations underscored the extensive nature of the movement, not merely during the attack in the bedroom, but indicating her active presence throughout the house at different times, before and after the police arrived. This corroborated the idea of Sydney performing post-incident actions, potentially related to concealment or staging, rather than solely being a catatonic victim. Indeed, the evidence strongly suggested that Sydney, far from being solely a victim of trauma, actively engaged in attempts to obscure the truth of her actions. Although Sydney appeared traumatized at the time, the evidence indicates she attempted to cover up what she'd done. This was a critical distinction, separating genuine, unadulterated shock from actions intended to mislead. Her traumatized demeanor, while real to an extent, was now seen through the lens of calculated concealment. The breaking of the rear window, a crucial initial indicator of forced entry, was reevaluated as part of this cover-up strategy. The broken window, was at the very rear of the house. We didn't see any rock or any object that would have done it, so we think that she most likely did it with her own hands because she did have blood on her hands. The physical location at the very rear of the house, less visible from the street, added to its suspicious nature. The absence of an external projectile or any object that would have done it, combined with the compelling fact that she did have blood on her hands, strongly supported the conclusion that the window was intentionally broken by Sydney herself, using her own bloodied hand.